All right, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Sorry for the little hiccup. We're going to try and start on time every week because we have a lot to cover. Hopefully, we'll go at a pace that is manageable. If you haven't used Teams before, I know that VT Lib has some training resources on our website, but if you do have any issues, just please send me an email. And you are free to stay on camera, stay off camera. Please stay muted if you're not talking. Please utilize the chat. I'll try to read everything aloud that comes into there. I'll try and keep that open and keep an eye on it. If it's not showing up for you, that's been a problem in the past. Try leaving the Teams meeting and coming back in. That may refresh it. I know if you're using the online web browser version of Teams, sometimes it doesn't appear. And if that's the case and you have left and come back, just feel free to interrupt me, really. You can utilize the raise hand at the top bar, as we saw earlier, or put something in the chat if you're comfortable with that. And if you are speaking, if you want to come on camera, that would be great, just so I can kind of connect a face with who's talking. Otherwise, feel free to stay as you are. Doesn't really make that much of a difference to me. All right, I'm going to start sharing my presentation for today. The class is a fair amount of lecturing, but hopefully we can get some discussions. I'm always happy to take questions as we go along. All right, and when this comes up, can I just get a verbal confirmation that you guys can see the presentation? Yes. I got a thumbs up. Thank you, Deanna. Oh, we have someone else joining us. Okay, so here we are, week one. I'm Lauren Kelly. I'm the technical services consultant here at the Department of Libraries. If we have not met before, hi, how are you? Thanks for joining. If we have met before, nice to see you again. Let's talk about cataloging. Today, we're going to go over kind of the orientation for the class, some objectives overall for the course, and then objectives for this week. We'll go into a lecture on MARC records. We'll talk about copy cataloging later, and then we'll discuss what the homework is. So the orientation for today, as we just went through, we are on Microsoft Teams. Camera's optional, raise your hands, use the chat. I'll try and read what comes there. Here's my email at the very top. It's also please reach out with whatever questions you have, any trouble you come across, any questions you have, all that stuff. One thing I'll say right up at the top is this course is going to be, you know, an intro level, but part of that will kind of hinge on your understanding of your integrated library system, your ILS. Generally, what I'm teaching will be applicable to your ILS, but the framework, the interface, those are all very specific things that will change depending on what ILS you have. So there is a bit of material for this class that may look a little different if you go to practice it on your ILS. And so if you email me with questions, if you're doing some real world work and have questions, always let me know what ILS you're working on. That gives me a framework, and hopefully we can find the right resources then. And then the last thing I'll ask is that there is a bit of work for this. It is a core course and it does have credit attached to it, so please do the work. And once again, if you are having any difficulties, I know everyone's juggling being a librarian, maybe not being a librarian at the moment, but you know, various life things are all applicable to you, and we all have different variables that we are coming up against. So if anything kind of gets in the way of your work, just let me know. I'd rather you just communicate with me about how things are going instead of me questioning kind of what's up with you. So just let me know. And if there's any kind of accommodations that you need, please reach out and we can work something out. So the objectives for today, let's see here. Trying to get this, oh gosh, to appear correctly. Can you guys see that slide filled out, or does it just look like boxes? It's just looking like boxes.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of white lines.
Can't see it. Okay. Let me share a different way. Sorry for this hiccup. Okay. All right. Getting back into the presentation here. Okay. Nope, not okay. Okay, well, this would usually be the slide where I would say, let me see, there we go. Okay, I'm just going to read it off of here. So basically from this course, this 5 weeks, at the end, I would like you to be a little bit more confident with your understanding of what MARC records are. We're going to go through a lot of tools that will aid in cataloging. Hopefully you'll become more comfortable with copy cataloging and editing records and really being able to understand what goes into a good record. And then I always want us to be thinking about why good cataloging matters, whether you catalog in the future or if you are just doing this in this class, because I think you'll find that, there are many outreaching points of cataloging. And then I wanted to go through the syllabus and the resources that are presented there. So we'll stop presenting for a moment and I'll switch over to this is our Niche Academy site. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to go in and look at it. If you need access, just let me know if something's not pulling up. Okay, so this is our Niche Academy site. I'm on this first syllabus intro area, and this just has our syllabus link here, which will pull up this guy here. Can everyone see the syllabus? Awesome, thank you. We have description, of course, my email, and then each week is listed out kind of what we're doing, and then also the homework. And then if you keep scrolling, we'll talk about this later today, this copy cataloging flowchart. There's a list with things bolded of the mark fields that kind of pertain to this intro class. We'll get more into that. It can be daunting. And then there's a bunch of resources towards the end of the syllabus. And these are kind of cataloger handy dandy links. And we will be demoing most of them throughout the class. I think in the last week, we can demo anything that we don't get to during the class, but I think we get to almost all of them. So nothing should be a surprise. And it's all here in this one place on Niche Academy. So I wanted to share that. And then in this homework files tab, here is where everything you need for kind of the ongoing homework, but it's really just one big project. So at the top here, you'll see MARC homework packet. But hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll know what you're looking at. But this is the homework packet. It'll be referred to throughout the syllabus and on Niche Academy. And then there's the book packet, and it's just scanned books with all of the pertinent information, and it'll make a little more sense as we go. But I just wanted to show you that those two resources are here under this homework files tab, and it's kind of going to be all you need throughout the class. Was anyone asking a question thus far? I think we're good. Okay, hopefully my presentation will work as it's supposed to. Let's pull that back up. All right, so objectives for today. Overall orientation, kind of done. I really want to encourage people to ask questions. Everybody's brain works a little differently. Questions help and may spark other questions and others to question different things. So it's always good to get that conversation going, and really everyone is at different experience levels. So please, no question is too basic. No question. I mean, maybe questions might be too advanced, but if that is the case, that gives me good feedback to do a follow-up course or do a course on a specific topic. So I'm always looking for things like that. So please feel free, bring the questions up for sure. We're just going to get familiar with basic elements of a MARC record today and get a little more comfortable with copy cataloging. And once again, why good cataloging matters. We want to keep that in the forefront as we move through what we see. So poll time. What we're looking at here. Anybody excited by this? Anyone a little scared by this? A little nervous? Maybe we haven't looked at something like this before. Maybe you have. Okay, here is still more daunting gobbledygook, numbers, words, indicators. And then here's maybe a little bit more friendly, still maybe not completely friendly, but you might be catching on to what you're seeing here in that those are all MARC record. And that's the basis of what we're talking about today, really. And when we say MARC records, we're talking about machine readable cataloging records. So over here on the left, you'll see this picture, what the catalog card tells us. When we talk about a MARC record, we're really talking about a condensed version of those catalog cards that used to live in wooden box in libraries that maybe many of us had experience with, and maybe some of us did not have experience with that because we've phased out into this machine readable, machine really meaning computer readable. And MARC is a framework for organizing bibliographic information. It is numerical. So when we looked at this here, you see all the way on the left, there are numbers. And all those numbers mean a different element. And that is the framework. And basically the framework is just rules, as I said, for computers, the machines, the MA in our acronym, because librarians love acronyms. And speaking of acronyms, ILS, our integrated library system, that's where all these now card catalog, it's the modern day card catalog database is our ILS system where all of our MARC records live. No longer a physical space, in a cloud and servers elsewhere in most cases. The Library of Congress gives a nice kind of definition here that the MARC formats, once again, it's formats, it's a framework. They're standards for the representation and communication of bibliographic and related information in machine readable form. So basically taking information, saying what kind of information does the computer need to read and how, that's the framework, it will be read in order to be stored. I don't think my animations are working for whatever reason, so we're just going to look at the slide like this. So what kind of bibliographic and related information do we want to represent and communicate in a MARC record? On the right here, we see there's the author. There's the title, the publisher, the year, the page length, and the height. And throughout these next 5 weeks or so, I kind of group things together by color. This first week is this purpley, pinky, maroon kind of first week. And I just want people to kind of get the visual representation of these elements, these bibliographic and related information bits, having fields. And as we go along, I hope the illustration and the visual metaphor will make more sense. So if they're grouped together funky, it's on purpose. So where do we find those elements on a physical book? For the most part, this course is going to be talking about books as materials, just plain old-fashioned, not large print, not audiobooks, not playaways, DVDs, none of that. Really, we're mostly going to be focusing on the book. So the author, when it comes to what gets put into a MARC record, you always want to use the title page. That's very important, the title page. Same with the title. What gets transferred onto the MARC record comes from the title page, not the cover. The title page is the authority for the fields. When it comes to publisher and the year, the publication page, which is the verso, which is on the other side of the title page, that's going to be the authority for that information. And how it appears there is how you incorporate it into the MARC record. And we'll go into these in depth, each field coming up ahead. The page length and the height are grouped together. You really want to write out the last numerated page. So even if there's like, about the author after the work ends, but it doesn't have a number on the page, you're not going to include that. You're going to include what is written out in the physical item. And then with the height, you're going to measure and round up in centimeters. This is the agreed upon way according to RDA, which we'll get to. I realized I just used another acronym. So where do those elements go in a MARC record? Your author is going to be in your 100 field, or if it's a corporation, 110. We'll get into that. More commonly, you will see 100 because it's usually a singular author that is being represented there. And if it's not, we'll get to that as well. Your title is going to go into your 245 field, and I'll explain what I mean by a field in a minute. Your publisher and your year, both of those elements are going to be recorded in a 264 field. Same with page length and height. Both of those elements are recorded in one field, and that's the 300 field. So when I'm talking about a field, there's a format to how a MARC field is laid out. So you get those content designators, which we saw in the previous example of a MARC record, those first 3-digit numbers that came all the way to the left. Those are the numerical tags. Next, there are 2 spaces for indicators that follow the tag. They are 1-digit codes, but often you will see a pound symbol, a hashtag, which just means empty, which is different than 0 because 0 can carry information. So if you want to say that a field is empty, typically a pound symbol is used. There's also the delimiter. Now, these can appear in various ways depending on your interface, but it's basically just showing that a new element of information is coming. Basically, it marks a subfield. And the subfield is a letter or a number representing which specific piece of information. And some of these for each field will not be filled, even in a good record. So we'll look as we go along about what subfields are actually used all the time, what ones are not, and which ones are repeatable. Some of them are. In the Mark 21 handbook, which there are links to each field with all of its rules and all of its examples on each slide. As we go ahead, you'll see what I mean in a minute, but it is always notated with an R or an NR for repeatable or not repeatable. So here's an example. Here is a book that we'll see a lot throughout this course, Michael Crichton's Dragon Teeth. It's a very fun book. But we have a tag, numerical tag. That's the field that we're working in, followed by two indicators, which carry information about the following information in the subfields. And then we have a delimiter. Here it is a not equals symbol, and that just means, okay, this is a subfield. And then we have a letter typically in bold. So this first example here, 100, which we noted earlier, 100 is for author. So we have 100. Our first indicator is a 1. We'll see what that means in a minute. The next one is null. It is empty character space. We'll see what that means in a minute, followed by a not equals sign, which is the limiter indicating subfield A. And the information that belongs in subfield A is Crichton, comma, Michael, comma. Then there's another subfield, subfield D, showing dates. In this case, the D subfield kind of pertains to the date, D for date, nice to remember. The next subfield, however, subfield E, explains kind of who this name is, and it's the author. I won't go through all the rest of these, but you can see that the pattern remains the same, where there's a numerical tag, two indicators, some of them are empty. The 300, you got a double empty indicator scenario, which just means that no information was needed there to talk about the following information in subfield A, how many pages, subfield C, the height of the item. And we'll get into that in more depth. So more about indicators and subfields, numerical tag, two indicators, delimiter marking the subfield. So indicators and subfields, they can change their meaning depending on which numerical tag or what field they're in the record. And indicators and delimiters are really, once again, machine readable. They're just information and the framework for the computer to process the information and to know what the information in the field or the subfield means. When it comes to subfields, punctuation matters for the most part. It kind of depends on what cataloging you're doing, but for our purposes, we will be using the punctuation matters way of cataloging. Basically, since newer sets of rules and standards, you do want to expand abbreviations. Except for centimeters, for whatever reason, that is still cm. And then when it comes to tags or fields, only about 10% of tags that are set up are always used, and about 90% are used occasionally or rarely. So this class is going to focus on that 10% of tags that you kind of always want to look for. We have a question in the chat, and it says, why do you need the not equal sign E to indicate author since it's in a 100 field? Okay, that's a fantastic question, and it has to do with the fact that even though we think computers are smart, they are not always smart. And so let's go back here. If you had basically almost any string without a delimiter and a subfield, the computer might not recognize that that information means X, Y, or Z, in this case, A, D, or E. It is a way to break up the information and be really specific about it so that the computer can basically index properly. Because if we had, let's say, if someone was looking for Michael Crichton as an author and you didn't have, I mean, I guess the first subfield A, I don't know if it's like actually necessary. I'm not an IT person. I'm not a computer science person at all, really. But having that subfield A is specifically designating that whatever is coming after that is going to be what can be searched and indexed. So instead of, like, for example, if we didn't have subfield D there, the computer might have an issue with someone looking for Crichton Michael without the dates, or they might have an issue with the name and the date if it was all input, not being able to differentiate between that author as the same person than is what is being looked for. So it's basically just a way to break it up really specifically so that the computer can know what to index. Does that make a little more sense? It really comes down to these rules for computers. So when it comes to Markfields, like I mentioned that we'll move into these Markfields to look at them more in depth. And all these slides are on the Niche Academy page. So if you want to go back and click through, you're welcome to. All the links should work. And each slide brings us to the Mark 21 handbook page for that field, which includes explanations, a really nice breakdown of the indicators, what they all mean, what all the subfields mean, and then examples at the bottom. And almost everything in cataloging is based on rules, but the rules are not always set in stone. And it's interesting to go into the Mark 21 handbook, which is, updated by the Library of Congress. And you'll notice that some things are in red. Red notates a change to the handbook. These are living documents. Cataloging is always evolving, which I find really interesting and maybe a little daunting sometimes because rules change. But for the most part, yeah, they get updated and we follow the rules and standards. All right, so I think, how is visibility when I'm in this? Are we okay? The animations are not working properly for whatever reason. I'll take them out and they should work. I'll make sure that the PDF on Niche Academy works properly. But okay, we're going to talk about Markfields individually. We're talking about 100, kind of the first big field to pay attention to because it is for the author. You'll notice the language, and this image here on the right is right off of the Mark 21 handbook. At the top, it has those indicators, what they mean, and then all the subfield codes. This is at the top of the page, and then as you scroll down, it'll break them up and explain what they mean further. So this is the main entry point for a personal name. For our kind of intro basic course understanding, we'll think of this as author. Interestingly enough, this is a non-repeatable field. Now, Lauren, there are books that have 2 authors or even more. Yes, you're right, there are. But we always want to make sure that there is one main 100 field. If there is another author, whoever is listed second on that title page is going to go into the 700s. And I think we talk about that later. So, but for the most part, your main entry of a personal name in most cases, the author is going to go in this field 100. It's non-repeatable. And now in week 3, we'll be talking about the Library of Congress authority database, which has subject headings and also authority names so that we don't get authors confused. If there are authors with the same name, they can have like Michael Crichton with Subfield D, having dates associated with that name so that we can understand that that person is that specific person. And once again, as I just mentioned, with cataloging being kind of a living practice, the Library of Congress name authorities do still get revised and updated, as do the subject headings. So nothing is quite stagnant or set in stone as much as it would be comfortable if things were. So let's look at an example. Once again, Michael Crichton, there he is. But we also have Louise Penny. Now, we can see that there is no subfield D for Louise Penny because, well, there really just aren't that many other authors at the popularity level of our own one Louise Penny. Doreen Cronin is a children's author. So there she is. And then the Bronte family. I wanted to put an example in there of, if you notice what's different about this last example with the Bronte family, there is a 3 in the first indicator space. Now, if we go back to our list here, it's a little bit hard to see, but our first indicator is going to be the type of personal name entry element. So this is basically saying what comes in subfield A is going to either be, if it's a 0, it's going to be a forename. If it's 1, it's going to be a surname, and 3 is going to be a family name. So the Bronte family is an authority record that can be referred to by family name and attributed as kind of the main entry, the main author of a work. An example of a 0 with a forename, Cher. Everybody loves Cher. She would get a 0 in that first indicator. Any questions so far about Markfield 100 indicating the author? Everybody feeling okay thus far? All right. And it's always helpful to look at examples and compare. So a complication to this field, let me see if I can present this. Nope, I can't. Okay. Well, 110 is for a corporate name or a group entity. If they were to produce something which is different than a family name, once again, non-repeatable, it acts very similarly to the 100. You can also look up their name authority to make sure you get all the little data points that should be there with a specific corporate name. So let's look at some examples of that to get a better understanding. So numerical tag 110. Okay, our main authorship. All right. The first indicator is a 2. Let's go back here. 2 is the name in direct order. Direct order of what? Well, as it appears on the title page, because remember, title page is what we're looking at to get this information off of a book. The second indicator is null. That's fine. So after our subfield A, New York Public Library, that is how it appears. That is an agreed upon way to attribute a work from the New York Public Library that they have published, created, authored in a Markfield for 110. And now if we go to the second example here, we have the Court of Appeals is really the main author. But if we go back to 1 here is jurisdiction name. Now I've pulled these examples from the Library of Congress name authority, but this is the way if you would have something published by the Court of Appeals. We do have a lot of government documents here at the state. And so the United States Court of Appeals, this is how their attribution appears in correct mark form. And then the Jean and Dorothy Newman Industrial Relations Library is an example of, let's see what 0 is, an inverted name. So this is not as it appears necessarily as the work, but it's how it's laid out so that it is specific and can be attributed to them really specifically from the authority from the Library of Congress. So that's some examples. Granted, the 110 field is going to be a lot less frequently seen than our 110 field, but I always think it's worth mentioning. Questions on 110? We're looking good. Okay, we're moving on to 245. I'm wondering, nope, okay. Wishful thinking. All right, 245, as we mentioned before, is for our title. This is for the title statement. Notice it's a non-repeatable field. Typically, things have one title. If they have more than one title, there are things we can do to represent that, not covered in this course. So title statement, this field is non-repeatable. Capitalization matters, punctuation matters. We'll look at what those are in a second. The indicators take a little bit of understanding. Added entry is probably going to be the most commonly seen with a 1 in the first indicator, excuse me, because it's an added entry, which just means that there's like linked data for it. Typically, there is an authority in the 100. There's an author that the work needs to be attributed with. Typically, that warrants a 1 in the first indicator. The second indicator is really what I want to take the time to really understand what's happening there, because our second indicator points out non-filing characters. And this kind of gets back at the fact that we are creating these records for machines to read, not people who can intuit, machines. So the second indicator is going to tell you that the first however many letters that show up in subfield A need to be non-filed, aka skipped when indexing. I think maybe looking at an example is going to be helpful here. Right here with our Louise Penny's The Madness of Crowds. We have 1 as our first indicator, and it's important to remember that when it comes to indicators, it's not a 2-digit number. It is 2 separate spaces that each bear different meaning with what comes next in the field. So here we have indicator 1 in the first slot, indicator 4 in the second slot. So that 4 is pertaining to the first 4 characters that appear in subfield A need to be skipped over when the computer does a search. Basically, by having 4 there in that second indicator slot, you skip the and a space, so that when someone searches for The Madness of Crowds, the computer's not going to get hung up and pull everything with the in it. The is completely taken out of the indexing, and so it's really just searching for Madness of Crowds. Does that make sense? That's one of the more important things about this field in particular, the 245 second indicator being those non-filing characters. And you'll notice that instead of a null, Instead of an empty slot, there's a 0 if there's nothing to skip. So you'll see 1 0 a lot for the indicators in the 245 field. And then after our subfield A, typically every field starts with subfield A. Kind of makes sense, comes at the beginning of the alphabet. Dragon teeth is how it appears in the title page, because once again, this is one of those elements that we rip right off of the title page, not physically. Then followed by a colon, because in the title page, it is written a novel. And then if you notice, there's always this slash right before the C field, which is for the author to be written out. And basically, remember, we're working with computers, and the computer recognizes that slash as, okay, that is the end of the title. Even though, yes, a new subfield is coming. It's plus with being able to share records, having these punctuation marks act as information for the computers. It's clarifying when you go to share a record, how that record then gets pulled in and populated into their bibliographic records format, if that makes sense. There is a hand from Jean.
So just a quick question, and maybe
Yeah.
I'm just being picky.
Go for it.
I'm noticing that, like, between, let's see, the first one, dragon teeth, there's the 10, the not equals, and then A, and then there's no space.
Yeah.
Between that and dragon teeth, and yet on some of the others there are.
We do want no space. It will appear that way. Yeah, basically all the subfields get right up against the subfield indicator. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
That's all.
No,
Thank
that's
you.
helpful. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. So let's talk about subfield C for a little bit. And as you can see, our second example here by Samuel Clemens with 16 full-page illustrations, descriptive captions, and introductory remarks by Stanley T. Williams. That's a lot of information that got put into one subfield in a field that is supposed to only be about the title. But that's the reason why A always needs to come first and be succinct and followed by a slash before any other subfield information so that the computer knows to kind of not index any of that stuff when someone is looking for a specific title. And once again, how do we know how much to put in subfield C? It's going to be based on what appears on the title page. Because there may be information there like descriptive captions and introductory remarks by Stanley T. Williams that may not have an exact field for its representation elsewhere, but it's still important and could be helpful to someone to see who's looking at an OPAC who's going to pull up this record. So it's basically what is presented on the title page gets recorded, but there is also some room for some cataloger's judgment, and kind of when in doubt, there are mark fields for notes about an item. I think maybe we'll get into that next week a little bit more. But for this field, 245, we want to do what's written on the title page. More questions about 245 title field? No. Okay, we're going to move on to 264 then. And The 264 field is a field that we'll get to this, I think, yeah, next week, because there is a set of rules from RDA that pertain to kind of the what information is represented and kind of, which is a little bit different than the how it's presented, which is what Mark really deals with, the framework for how this material comes across. But our 264 field is really the most common now for talking about the production, the publication, distribution, manufacture, and the copyright. It's a lot of information for one field. It is repeatable. And this 264 has kind of replaced 260s, but you might still see a 260 field in a record that you pull in, which is fine. It has similar information. But for today, we're going to be talking about 264 more so. For the most part, you're going to have a first indicator that is empty. The sequence of statements, it generally is null. The second indicator, you're going to see a 1 in that second indicator position, meaning this is the publication information of this specific item, or a 4. This is the copyright notice for the material. You're typically going to see subfield A, which is place of, typically if it's a 1 in the second indicator, publication. So subfield A is going to be place of publication. Subfield B is going to be the name of the publisher. And then C is going to be date of publication. You can also repeat this field and have a second indicator of 4. And so that really designates that that's the copyright, which materials can have both a publication date and a copyright date. They can differ or they can be the same. But this 264 field is repeatable so that all of those kind of scenarios can be represented. Let's look at some examples. All right, so like I said, all of these indicators are blank, they're null, but some of them are 4s, some of them are 1s. And if we notice in the subfield C, there's the little copyright symbol on both of these ones that have a 4 in their second indicator slot, really stating that the copyright of this material belongs to Minotaur Books. That is the name of the publisher still, and the publisher is out of New York. That is the case for all of these, even though we have HarperCollins, Greenwich House, and Little Simon. And once again, yeah, I think all of these, basically everything that appears in the subfield, you're going to see it's cozied right up against those subfield codes. Questions on the 264 publication and copyright fields? Not seeing any at the moment. And as we go through each week, we'll always recap what we talked about the previous week. So this will not be the last. Hopefully it's not the first time, but it won't be the last for sure. All right, moving on to the 300s field. This is all about the physical description. It is a field that is repeatable. For our purposes, we're talking about retaining the information of pagination of a book and its height in centimeters. Once again, the language kind of changes. This is a field where the indicators don't carry any information, so they're both null. Nothing goes into them. But A, subfield A, is talking about the extent, which is repeatable. The extent generally, when talking about a book, just means the page numbers, how many pages it consists of. And I will say that if there's an intro that has like Roman numerals, typically the Roman numerals of the intro, whatever is actually physically marked on the book, they get noted, then a comma, then the last numerated page gets written down, pages, and then we'll look at some examples to talk about punctuation, but this is another field where punctuation does matter because it gives the computer some direction in terms of what field is coming next and what it might mean. So our next field typically that we're going to see for centimeters is going to go into C for dimensions. And that typically always refers to height because on a quick look, we need to know how tall our shelves need to be, or if something might be in an oversized area, if it might be down below. Having that information about height in the mark record can be very helpful. So let's look at some examples before I get too deep. Because I want to talk about subfield B and when that might show up and how that might look. But our first two examples don't have a subfield B, typically because they're just going to be longer novels. In the first example, once again, both of our indicators are blank. There's no information about this field that is carried in those indicators, but they still are part of the framework, but nothing's in them. So we have subfield A, we have 295 pages. Notice there's a semicolon. Then we have subfield C, 24 centimeters. Looking great. Our next example here, the second example, has Roman numeral 11. So we can kind of infer from that that there are 11 pages of an intro notated in Roman numerals. It just gets marked like that with a comma. And then the last numerated page is 393. So that gets written down and then a semicolon and then 21 centimeters in our subfield C. Okay, so our next example here is something that has illustrations. And that gets notated in subfield B because remember, 300 is all about description, describing the item at hand. So our subfield A has 436 pages. Notice there's a colon. There's a colon because there's information in subfield B. And notice the punctuation at the end of subfield B is similar to the two above, where at the end of that information bit, the end of that element, the end of that subfield, that's where the semicolon comes, because the next is subfield C with information about height. And then our last example here, and you'll see it with a lot of children's materials, is that something doesn't have page numbers at all. It's still a book. We still want to describe it in some kind of way. Well, it's a volume. Volume is the language for book. And we'll talk about this, I think, next week when we talk about some other 300s fields that have to do with description, but not necessarily this kind of description. This kind of description is saying we have one volume, it is unpaged. There are illustrations though, so we still have a colon after our notation about the extent of the item. We have illustrations, we have a semicolon, and then we have subfield C with 27 centimeters. Questions about these 300s fields? We're doing okay? A question from John states, does a colon indicate that there is another field to follow? Yes. And the semicolon indicates that the next field is the last. Not necessarily last field, but it does notate the end of that kind of information. So you're definitely getting at the fact that these specific punctuation marks tell something very direct to the computer about where it is in the sequence of information. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. The colon indicates that there's another field to follow. Now, a follow-up on that point is that the punctuation might change depending on the field you're in. We noticed it with the title in 245 that a colon came before a subtitle in that B subfield, and then it was followed by a slash instead of what we're seeing here in like our third and fourth example with a colon coming before the B, and then there's no slash, it's a semicolon. And then same with if you had a title in the 245 field without a subtitle, you wouldn't use a colon or a semicolon. You're just going to have the slash. So the punctuation changes between fields and between subfields as well. So that's one of the things about cataloging that I always stand by is that committing things to memory is great and efficient, but maybe not the best use of your brain time. And so going to the Mark 21 handbook and making sure that your punctuation actually lines up is a great thing to do. Jean has a question of what if you have a book that is particularly wide? Can a wide book be described? Yes, there are examples that I've seen with height and width notated. And it basically is like if you had a book 25 and then an X, kind of meaning by 27 centimeters. That can happen. Typically, when centimeters are alone, it just refers to the height. Allison, you have your hand up.
Yes. Well, first, the comment about the wide books. I can't remember the exact specifications or how it, and I don't know how it would be annotated, but wouldn't it then be classified as a folio?
I think it depends on the material. Because I don't think you would want to put like a children's oversized book as a folio. That might mess with like reporting and things like that. So I think you would still want to.
Size specification though.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me look into that.
But question. Then the question I had before that was you were mentioning how it's not a great use of your brain space to remember all these numbers. Am I correct that it's called the cutter, like where you check these things? That's library jargon that is escaping me.
Yeah, so cutter actually refers specifically to call numbers, and cutter is a way to notate. It's a way to shorten information to get it in a call number, which we'll be talking about that, I think, later in like week 4. But yes, cutter numbers do come up, but it's not necessarily a part of Mark. It's more so about classification. So we will get to that. Thanks for your questions. John asks, is height always the first number if the width is also included? I'm pretty sure it is. That might be something that I would want to confirm, but I'm pretty sure it's always height by width. Yeah. All right, any more questions about 300? We are at 11 o'clock. We have a bit more to go through, but I think we're done looking at Markfields for right now. So, okay. Always opportunities for more questions as we move along. Let me see if anything will present properly. No, they won't. Okay, that's fine. All right, so some questions to think about after your lovely questions that you've brought up. Who is a complete Mark record useful or beneficial to? Is anyone feeling brave and would like to verbally respond to this question or type out some thoughts in the chat? Or just ruminate on yourself, maybe email me later if you have a stroke of brilliance about who are we doing this for? Who are we following this for? Wendy.
For indexers? People who are indexing books?
That's a great response.
Yay.
Yeah. Indexers, which are often computers, but I mean, you could really think about it as a patron being an indexer because they're, you know, saying this is the information that I need, computer, look for this information. All right, well, I'll just let you think about it. Maybe next week we'll return, so start coming up with some responses here. Another question is, what could be the results of discrepancies or even errors in MARC records? What is it going to mean for an indexer if the publication's all messed up, either incorrect or just not properly formatted? What's the repercussions of that? Riley has her hand up.
I was just thinking, sometimes I'm looking for something in a series, and if it's not cataloged correctly, then it might be, like on Koha, it might say, actually, we have book 1, 2, and 4, but like book 3 wasn't cataloged correctly. And then it's, for people who may not be as trained, they might say, we don't even have book 3. And so there's like different levels of people using the record with different levels of understanding how to use it. And having the most complete record would make it, the most effective at getting what you're looking for.
Yeah, I love that. You've brought up an important factor to think about is this layers of interaction. Because not only do we have someone who's doing the indexing, which there's layers to that. Is it a librarian doing that recall work? Is it a patron themselves doing that recall work? Both of those users, or is it another cataloger doing that recall work? Is it someone who's looking for a record to copy catalog in a shared system? There's all these different layers of what discrepancies, errors, and really who gets impacted by the completeness of a record. It's not just because catalogers love rules. All right. Thanks, everybody. Does anyone have something else they want to put? Wendy.
Yeah, I'm wondering if discrepancies in MARC records could lead to inadvertent duplicates. If someone doesn't see exactly what they're looking for because it's not formatted correctly, then they'll think, oh, that doesn't exist, and they'll make it, and then all of a sudden, there's this error because, oh, maybe there's more books, and then when it comes time to organize that information or collate it for whatever reason, it's going to show up as too many records. If that makes sense, what I just said.
Definitely. I think that we think about, because we're doing this on a computer and it's the cloud and space is endless and information is, like there are boundless servers. Oh wait, servers are physical space in a way. So we actually don't want 10 records that are of the same item, but the discrepancies are so minor and off that we still have 10 of the same thing in the catalog. And that means that the computer has to search through those 10 things instead of one thing in order to recall. So that's a great point as well. Allison, you are muted.
Thank you. In thinking about how the computer has taken on some of this work and the cataloger has always done it, I'm wondering which ways, if any, the computer is starting to catch like errors in the MARC record. And personally, I'm now working as a school librarian, and like Folly Destiny is not nearly as advanced as, you know, our training for some librarians with Voyager, and just seeing the sophistication differences in a MARC record to me is something I'm learning. So I don't know, that's a very like general question, if that makes sense. But correcting MARC records, if the computer is catching it, thoughts about that in general?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question and very timely. There are a couple of ways that my brain wants to shoot off of from that idea. And one of them is that there's so much nice and good automation that can happen. I've worked at public libraries that have Koha, and Koha has the ability to say, okay, there are enough points of these two records that I know they're the same, I can collate. And that can happen periodically, automatically, without, you know, catalogers really have to do too much to do. So that's always helpful. And then I've lost my train of thought in the other directions, but it's a good point about how it can be helpful. Yeah, and I'm always curious as to what else is kind of coming down the pipeline when it comes to automation technology of cataloging. Okay, I don't want to lose too much time for our next kind of section when we're talking about copy cataloging. All right, we're going to move forward. Thanks, everyone, for contributing. All right, so when it comes to copy cataloging, and what we're talking about when we say copy cataloging is really shortcuts. But the way to do these shortcuts is you have to have enough foundational knowledge of what makes a good record or a usable record or a bad record in order to cut down on your time where you don't have to do original cataloging. So what goes into being able to distinguish whether it's a good, usable, or bad record? Well, we can ask what fields are present. And the fields we've gone over today are all things that should be present in a record, and that will make it good and or usable. An important question is this the correct edition of the item that I have in my hand that I'm looking for a record for? And two ways to check that are to look at the publication date, as well as the pagination. Those are two really quick ways. And can anyone tell me where we might find the publication date? Feel free to put it in the chat. And also the pagination. Wendy has her hand up.
Is it on the Verso page?
Yes, it'll be in the Verso page. And then where are we going to find it on the MARC? In the MARC record. Where does publication date go? Yeah, Ariana, do you have your hand up?
Wasn't that the 260s? Is it 260 something?
Yes, 264. Yep, Sarah and Danielle also. Yep, yeah. So that'll be in that 264 field, and it'll probably be in subfield C with the date. And then pagination. Anybody think of where we find the pagination? Either on the physical item or in a MARC record? Sarah says 300, which is correct. I also see that Wendy had her hand up. Yes, 300 is correct. And that pagination is going to come in the A field, 300 subfield A. And then another question worth asking is, are there fixable errors? Or are there kind of discrepancies that are minor enough that you know that you can pull that record, change that one thing, and be good to go? Obviously, these things take time and practice, but there are also some tools that one can use when copy cataloging. So kind of the first step when you get an item and you're wanting to do some copy cataloging in order to get a record for it, you're just going to check your catalog. Do other libraries have this? Sorry, there's construction in the building and I don't think anyone can hear it, which is good except me, but it's very annoying. All right, the second option here really, and this is kind of built into that first step, that there is a Z39.50 search. That's kind of just a funky title for this tool that's built into most ILS systems that kind of goes out and speaks to several other catalogs, searching for the item, searching for the bibliographic record, searching for the mark. And in many cases, you have the ability kind of on the back end of your ILS to say, yeah, check there, check there, check there. There are some library catalogs that work in Z3950 that kind of always give really good results, whether it's like, I think it's Milwaukee Public Library. I think on the syllabus they're listed, Ohio Link, OCLC typically, but those are kind of really easy ways to be able to access good MARC records without having to do much work. One thing that you can do is you can always compare records in different systems. So here in step 3, I have the Library of Congress catalog. Obviously, the Library of Congress is huge. They have a team of people cataloging up to date, and there's a lot of information in there. And you can always check on their records. But more locally, and there is a tutorial on the Technical Services webpage, I think in a couple of places, where you can download a MARC record out of Clover, the system that is used for interlibrary loan. And I believe almost every single library has a login, even if they don't use ILL or the Courier. But you should have access to Clover, which there are a lot of Vermont specific materials that our smaller public libraries get and the state gets, but we can share those records through Clover. And there's a tutorial, which, you know, a couple of steps, you'll need your login, but if you don't know it, just email April Shaw, or potentially ask your interlibrary loan librarian. But that's another way to get records to easily copy catalog them. And then I'll mention Cat Express, which is changing its name to WorldShare. And we'll be doing a webinar in December about that, but it's something that the state partners with libraries for in order to get access to hard to find cataloging records, basically so that you don't have to do original cataloging, because that's time consuming. And also requires a depth of knowledge and resources in order to do. So that's why we harp so much on copy cataloging, and doing this course, I think hopefully gives you the basics to be able to do that better. And then the biggest stipulation about copy cataloging, and this is where my brain was going off of Allison's comment about knowing your integrated library system, knowing how your ILS works is so key to doing any kind of cataloging work, especially copy cataloging with downloading and importing records, making sure that specific fields link up. And then in terms of how your ILS displays information in different fields, basically how fields get indexed can vary between catalogs. So if there's information, good information in a field that doesn't get shown in your ILS, you may have to think about, darn, I really want that information there. What field can I use differently in order for those things to be shown? So it comes down to knowing what your ILS can do, how to achieve whatever it is you're looking for, or if it's even achievable at all, because there are limitations to our ILS, no matter what you use. So questions about copy cataloging. I'm always happy to demo stuff as well. We may not have time today for demoing, but we can put time in the coming weeks for demoing if people would like to see that. Last thing I'll say about copy cataloging, I think, is if you change anything about a record, you always want to annotate in the record that a change has been made by your library. So that kind of information gets put into 040 field, and it's subfield D specifically in the 040. 040 is one of those fields that looks a little bit like gobbledygook because it's trying to retain kind of a bunch of different elements, but it all pertains to the source of the cataloging. Who is making changes? What language are they using? What's the language of their catalog? What standards are they using? All of that kind of information. And from a copy cataloging standpoint, really the only field that you need to memorize in this case is that subfield D is where you need to put your institution code or your consortium code, depending on how your consortium set up. And it is the cataloging source. This is a repeatable field. So if you have a MARC record that's been passed along 10 libraries, you may have 10 different subfield Ds. Hopefully a record doesn't really need that much work each time, but there are local fields where if you add something locally, you still need to notate it. So any change that happens to a record, you have to notate you have done that work. Does that make sense? I think we can look at some examples, if not. And there is a website, I believe it is linked on the syllabus, in order to find out your institution code, because that's something that is managed, I think, by OCLC. All right, we'll transition into talking about the homework. So, as I kind of mentioned before, we're really working off of one big packet and one kind of large handout. So the big work for this class is going to be cumulative over time, but please keep up with it. So for next week, hopefully you can look at the first 10 items from the scanned packet and fill out the first 10 sections on the homework sheet. Fill it out to the first dotted line, and if you can, do it by hand. I recognize that that's not everyone's gig, and that's fine. If you don't have access to a printer, that's fine. You can fill it out online. And I can pull up what I'm talking about in a second just to go over that again. And there's an additional piece that I would love to have one goal that you have for taking this course. It gives me some context as to how much cataloging experience you've had, and it lets me know what you want to get out of this course. Whether that solely be the credit. Lauren, this is my last class that I have for my certification project. I'm never going to catalog in my life. I just needed the credit. I want to know that. It's all good. If you're just here for the tools that you'll get, that's great. If you really love cataloging, you want to understand more, you want cataloging expertise, I love to hear that as well. Or if you just want the bare minimum of cataloging, that's mighty fine as well. Please send that to me in an email. And I will say throughout the course, if you want to go over homework, we can bake some time in to just share out how things are going. If you have questions, if you want me to look over anything at all, please just send it to me in an email. I'm happy to do that, so that it's not the end of the course and you're like, oh no, I need to fill out these 25 items and I don't understand what goes into a 100 field. Please just keep me updated with how you're doing. And I think that will be all good in that regard. So let me pull up the packets just one more time just to really make it clear. I'm going to finally stop sharing this. I'm going to go back to our cataloging core course. Here we are in our Niche Academy site. Hopefully everyone has been able to log in our homework files. Okay, here's the packet. It's going to open up. It's going to look like this. This is what I'm talking about. See this dotted line here kind of towards the bottom of the page right before the 300s. These are the things we've talked about today. How wild is that? Our 100 fields, our 245, our 264, and our 300s. Go through the first 10 items that are in this final assignment part 1 right here, this link here, this materials item packet part 1. The first one, Felix XY. And you're just going to go through these first 5 or so pages pertain to this first book. Yeah. Oh, look, page number 283. I wonder what field that goes in. You should know this by now. But yeah, you're just going to go through and, type or print out and handwrite, up to you, those corresponding elements from the scanned book into this sheet. Does that make sense? Are there questions? We're doing all right? Okay, so.
Do we send the homework to you or do we save it for when class for next week? Or
yeah, so the final packet is going to be due week 5, and I will take it over email, or there's a place to upload it on Niche Academy. I won't ask you to submit things as we go along. It'll be really up to you if you want me to check things over as you go. But yeah, so final packet will be due at the end of class because we'll add elements as we go along. But I'm happy to look over anything beforehand. Just send it to me via email. If you do print stuff and work on it, if you have scanning ability or even just sending a picture, people did that last semester. I'm totally fine with receiving material that way. Whatever works easiest for you would be just fine. That's the questions about homework. Here's what we talked about today. We talked about our author going in 100 from the title page, our title from the title page going into 245, excuse me, our publisher and our year going into fields in the 264. Once again, that's from the verso page. And then the page length, the last notated number in the back of the book goes into 300 as well as the height in 300. So those should not scare you so much anymore. We don't want cataloging to be scary, although sometimes it can be. Are there questions before I go to our last slide, which basically says the end of week 1, although it's really the beginning of week 1, right? So end of week 1 presentation, at least. I will stop sharing. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to give you 3 minutes back of your time. Nope, we have a question. Do we fill out the fields to the first dotted line for every book in the final assignment file? You will by the end of the course. For next week, just look at the first 10. The first 10 on the homework packet should be filled out with the first 10 of that scanned collection of items. And if you have questions, send me an email. If things aren't working out very well, send me an email. Yeah, and do we need to do it for each book? Yes. Yep, it should be one page of that homework packet pertains to like the 5 pages that make up a book, and you can kind of tell which pages pertain to what book. Very good. Happy to take other questions. Oh, I will put this recording onto our Niche Academy site. There will be a section for class recording. So please refer to it. Once again, if you have any issues accessing that on Niche Academy, let me know. We'll figure it out. If there's no more questions, thank you everyone for bringing your questions. Oh, Ariana, you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you about next week.
Yeah.
Because I had sent you an email that I'm not going to be able to make it.
Yeah.
So just making sure that that's still okay.
Yes.
And what I can do to make up for that.
Yeah, so that's great. Thanks for asking that with everyone here. If for whatever reason you won't be able to make class live, this is why we have the recordings. Just let me know ahead of time so that I'm not waiting around too much. And I'm happy to email you when the recording is up and accessible. And please just watch it and send me questions you have, thoughts you have, maybe responses to any questions that come up. I think we're all adults here and are in charge of our own learning, really. So, you know, honesty is the best policy. Just let me know how things are going if you have questions. And if the homework doesn't make sense, send me an email. Just keep me updated and let me know about any absences. And if you just let me know you've watched the recording, if you have any questions, I'm happy to give credit as long as, you know, you're letting me know that you're still engaged. All right, on that note, I'm going to end the recording.